So without further ado, let's get started. We're kind of just going to go an overview of GPA, some of the formulas that PowerSchool has built in and what they do, as well as some of the data access tags, either for your reporting or student screens. And then we get to the end, if we have some time, we'll try to do some Q&As with some of the questions that come in. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A feature right now. The people you just heard from before are going to answer them as they come in. If they do feel it's something that we need to talk about or show a little bit more, we will do some live answering. But if they can just answer it by typing it out to you or send in an article that explains a little bit more, they will. Please do not put in any student data. And also know that for some of your questions, we may ask you to open a case because we cannot actually look at your data for security purposes at this point in time. But go ahead, if you have questions, you want to go ahead and put them in, that's fine. They are ready to answer them as we go. Just as an overview about GPAs, it's a snapshot of how the student is doing based on what you define right now. I would like to point out at this point in time that in the system, GPAs are always done, quote unquote, on the fly. So when you open a page or you run a report or you run an export, the GPA is being calculated right then and there. The one place where GPAs are stored, or along with if you have a class rank, GPAs are stored with the class rank record. But if you open up, say, the student screens or something like that, those GPAs aren't stored anywhere. It is done on the fly. Now, you can do GPA, you can calculate GPA however you want. We're basically going to cover a couple aspects and some of the formulas that PowerSchool provides and is already in your system. If you want to do something else, if you want to do added value, if you want to times by added value, if you want to do added value with the weighted, whatever you want to do, whatever grades you want to look at, that setup is up to you, your district, your state, whatever it is. But we can still cover what GPAs do and what this information you're looking at here means. Some we're going to go over today are what we call simple percent, weighted, and weighted percent. Again, you guys can call them whatever, but to the system and just to keep everything at the same ground level, we know what we're discussing here. When I say simple, what I mean is, GPA points divided by GPA count. Around that, weighted is where we're going to add in the potential credit as well. We're going to go through those a little bit more in depth as we go, but just as some ground rules, this is the language we're going to use, and this is what you're going to see in your system if you go to your district GPA calculations, and then the methods. These names are going to match up with the GPA calculations that are provided by PowerSchool. Some of y'all may know this, but just again, as some ground rules, here's how the formula reads and what it does. So it's going to total the GPA points, divide by the GPA count. I have 4 A's and a B, and let's say it's, the A's are 4 and the B's are 3. So it'll be, 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 3 divided by 5 because I have 5 grades. The number at the very end is the number of decimal places. Some people have that at 0. Some people have that at 2. Again, out of the box is 4, but that's how many decimal places there will be in your GPA, and that's where it's going to round. And again, we have round. You can also truncate. So instead of having it round, if I have a 3.57449, I could have it where it's the 3.575 or just show the 3.74 because I truncate. You can do either. What we're showing here is rounding, but truncating is perfectly fine as well. Again, how you do GPA and what you do is up to you. and everything is okay. So this is just a little bit more in depth of what we just went over in what is called a simple formula in the system. So it's going to calculate the sum of the GPA points, count the number of grades that are part of the formula, divide the sum by the count, and then go ahead and round it. So looking at a real world scenario here, we have a student. There's 18 grades that are part of the GPA calculation. Here's the GPA points in the column, adding all those up to 65. So it's straightforward. 65 divided by the 18 gets the 3.611, and we are rounding at the 2. So it's going to show, apologize about that, it's going to show as a 3.61. Now we're going to use these exact same grades when we look at it through a weighted formula, again, using the language we have here. So this time it's going to multiply the GPA points by the potential credit. So in my example where I had the 4 A's and a B, let's say one of my A's has 1 potential credit, the other 3 have the 0.5. So instead of doing the 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, it will be a 4, and then a 2, a 2, a 2, and then, and so on and so forth. So it's going to do the math of the potential credit first, and then it's going to sum that together.
Excuse me, Charles?
Yes.
Might be annoying. Just some food for thought. I've always thought this formula should be GPA points times GPA earned credit in the numerator rather than potential credit, because if a student fails a class and has 0 earned credit but 1 potential credit, that could throw off the GPA.
We do see that as well. But again, it comes out of the box as the potential, and that's why we're showing it here. But yeah, earned credit is probably something that I would do if I was setting it up, if I was in charge. So that is perfectly okay as well. Again, you guys, it's your school, it's your district, it's your state, either what you guys want to show it as or what you need to, depending on regulations. But yeah, no, we do see the earned credit. We see the potential credit as just, I know what ships, what's out of the box. It does it the potential credit in both. But yeah, Jason's perfectly correct. In this example, it is using potential. So again, it'll do the GPA points by the potential. You would add all those together. Then instead, it'll do the sum of the potential credits. So I could potentially, of my 5 grades, there's a potential for 3 credit or whatever it is in there. Divide the sum of the points by the potential credit by the sum of the potential credit, and then round. So we're going to go back to the same list of classes as before. However, this time we are adding in the potential credit. So whereas before we had the 65 divided by 18, this 3.333, because the potential credit is 0.5, that changes the math it's using to the 1.66665. And on down the line, if you take a look here at chamber singers and consumer math, you see these have 1 potential credit. So therefore, getting a 4 in consumer math is worth double getting an A in open media or in Spanish 1. So people do use this if, you want to say AP history, it's just worth more than just regular history. This is a way you can do it by using the AP history is just worth more credit. So therefore, when you're using a weighted formula such as this, an A in AP history just counts more than an A in regular history or any of the other grade setup. So doing the math here, you see, instead of it being the 65 divided by 18, we're doing the 35 because we've done the math of GPA points times potential credit, and we got column G there. We added up column G for 35, and we added up column E, 9.5. So we have a 3.68. So the simple, just a straight GPA divided by a number of grades, 3.61. This actually raises the GPA because some of those A's count a little bit more than others. So get an A in consumer math weights it a little bit higher. So the GPA goes from a 3.61 to 3.68. So we're actually going to look at what's set up on the GPA calculations page itself. Let me just, although some of you may know how to get there. You got to be at the district office. Under setup, go to district. We're going to go down to GPA calculations and then calculation methods. You see in this test server, we have a couple different ones. So if I click on simple, and then we're going to look at what the rest of this means. So we have the formula and what the formula does, but now the rest of it is what grades is it looking at? We have the math of what the GPA does. Now we need to know, or we need to tell it, hey, what grades do we want to be part of this GPA method? So that's the next part of what we're looking at. As we said, the calculation type, you have cumulative, current, and projected. Cumulative is basically stored grades. It's looking at the grades that are in the stored grades table that's on their historical grades page. Current's going to look at the reporting term that is set up under the current grade display. Go back to the test server, and that is set up. Let's go to a school. So things are jumping around a little bit on me. So at the school, under grading, we have current grade display. So right now for Apple Grove High School, the 22-23 school year, it is set to Y1. So anytime my GPA is looking at current grades, it's going to look at what is in the Y1 for the students in the out of the grade book. So let me just see here. So for example, for this student, they are not in a class that has a Y1. So this student, if I'm using a current GPA, would most likely come back blank because there is no Y1 reporting term in any of their classes. I would have to switch the current grid display to quarter one or S1 or whatever I wanted to look at. Now, this is good, or it's used for, depending on how you set up certain things. If you want the GPA under the quick lookup to be current, and you want it to roll with what you consider the current term, whether it's Q1, Q2, so on and so forth, you can set up a current GPA. Some people do it for honor roll or class rank. So again, it can be used in a bunch of different ways. It's really up to you. But current looks at the reporting term that is set here. And again, our example student has no Y1 reporting terms in classes, so they wouldn't have a GPA. The next thing we're going to look at here is the next item under that is grade scale. So let me explain a little bit of what happens here in both cumulative and current setups. So let me go back to the simple here. So let's pretend here that this is set to cumulative and it's default, and we have this other information figured out. So anytime there's a grade scale set here, the GPA filters all of the grades through that grade scale. That can be what you want or not what I want, depending. So let's say we're looking at stored grades. If I have an A in AP history, and if I get AP history, I get 5 GPA points for the A in AP history. If I have the grade scale here, you can take a look at what it does. When this GPA does the math using my A in AP history, even though the grade has a 5, it's going to use 4 in the math because it filters everything through this GPA. So this can be used, I've seen it where some districts, they do a simple and a weighted. And in the simple, they're like, we want everything to just be on the 4-point scale. And then in the weighted, we want to use the 5s that people got for their AP history or whatever classes. You can set this on, say, the simple like here. So yeah, you took AP history, you took college geometry, you took calculus, and you normally get 5s and 6s and more. But in this GPA, we want to know what you have just straight on. You have an A. Nobody gets more than a 4 in this. So you would put the GPA on there to filter everything through it. The same thing happens if you're looking at current grades, where it's going to filter based through that grade scale and not necessarily the one that's on the section or the course. So some of the pain points we run into, calls we get where GPA is wrong, is because it's filtering through this grade scale and people don't realize it. Or if I have a stored grade that's not on this grade scale, the GPA is not going to use it. So let's say you have a grade that's a U. This grade scale does not have a U, so it's not going to use that grade. So that could be another thing where you think it is and it's not. It has to be on this grade scale and it has to match. I had a customer a couple years ago where everything looked fine, but they had entered in 5 A's that had a space after it. So the grade was technically A space. And A space is not on the grade scale, so it wasn't a part of the GPA calculation. We took the spaces out, it matched, it filtered through. That's fine. The space is not something normally run into, but just using that as an example of it has to match a grade that's on the grade scale. If you're like, you know what, I want to use the grade that's on that it's stored with, so I want that AP history to use that 5 and the regular math to use a 4, whatever, we were going to take the information from the grade or from the course or section. If you're looking at current, then you leave grade scale here blank. Okay, grade scale is used to filter the grades through the grade scale to either bring the GPA points and percent down, move it up, whatever you need it to do. If you needed to shift and not use exactly what's on the grade or exactly the GPA, that the grade scale that's on the course, that's how you do that. So let's see. Like I was explaining here, this grade scale, A is worth a 4. The stored grade's a 5. However, it's going to use the 4 when doing the calculation. The next part we're going to look at that help limit down what grades we are looking at. So apologize, my mouse is having some fun with me today. The terms are the reporting terms. If you wanted to just look at, say, S1 or just look at Y1, or in this case, S1, S2, Y1. So you have stored grades in quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3. They're not going to count in this setup. This helps limit down which grades we're looking at. So in this example, I'm only looking at stored grades in S1, S2, and Y1. This comes into play where some districts, obviously, you store every single quarter and everything. We store quarter one, we store quarter two, but we have that as a running tally. We need it elsewhere. But when we're doing our GPA, we're just looking at our quote unquote final grades. We're just looking at S1, just looking at S2, just looking at Y1. Same thing here with grade levels. If you want a different calculation or look at different grades, hey, we just want their senior year, you could just put 12 there. If you just want ninth grade, we don't really count. We just want 10, 11, 12. You would put that in here. Same thing with the school years. The school years, it's the year the school year begins. So for this year, if I wanted to look at just S1, S2, Y1 stored grades for this year, the 22-23 year, I would just put 2022. If I have 2021, 2022, I'm looking at S1, S2, Y1 stored grades for last year and this year. Again, in the year, it's the year the school year started. All of these options are just comma separated. If you have comma and space, that can throw off the calculation. It cannot look at certain grades. So make sure you're just doing it comma separated. And then credit types. Some people, I worked with a customer a couple weeks ago, they wanted a math GPA and they want a science GPA and a history GPA. So the credit types you have set on the course, if you want to pull specifically, hey, how are they doing in their math? How are they doing in their science? You can break it down as far as that by having a credit type on the course and on the stored grades and say, this one, if they have the credit type of SCI, I want to limit it down further and just look at that. Again, these options are to help you limit down which grades you actually want to look at. Some people leave it a little too open and it's pulling in these Q1 grades you don't want. Some people limit it down a little too much and it's not looking at the grades you want. So those are some of the big calls we come in. When I say this a lot here. GPA is not wrong. It's always either doing something, either doing different math than what you think or looking at different grades than what you think. So I know we get a lot of calls that come in and they're like, well, the GPA is wrong. It's like, well, it's not necessarily wrong. It's just different than what you're looking for or what you're expecting. It could be high. It could be lower because you have a grade scale on the GPA, and when you're doing the math by hand, you're not taking that into account. It could be different because, we're just looking at last year's Y1. We haven't added in this year's. So I like to say that just to start from, and this is how I do my troubleshooting. I start from a place of it's not wrong. It's just different than what you want. Now let's figure out why it's different than what you want. And again, usually it's either a misunderstanding in the math. You could be doing weighted using potential credits, but the line you're looking at is just a simple. Could be, again, there's a grade scale on there where there shouldn't be a grade scale. You haven't updated it for this year. Could be anything, but I like saying that in these sessions because that's my mindset. It's not wrong. It's just different than what you think it should be. And let's figure out why. And that's, I like to tell our agents that as well, because when you look at it a little bit different, at least to me, you're going in like, okay, let's try to figure out where the breakdown is. The GPA it's showing is right for the grades it's looking at. Now let's figure out the grades it's looking at and the math it's doing. Off my soapbox right now. The only include grades. You can limit down further when you store grades, or as we talked last time on the grade scale, those check boxes of, does it count in GPA? Does it have potential credit, stuff like that? This comes in the factor. So you may have stored grades, but hey, we don't count our PE in there. So our PE classes are set to not count in GPA. So when we pull it, the GPA, it doesn't use those grades. Same thing with class rank or honor roll. All of these checkboxes can be used to limit down what grades you're looking at. And just as a little more explanation on here, this is from the help. If you go to your top right here and click on help, system help, and you get to GPA calculations, it's going to bring you to this. Just to clarify a couple things, if that type box is blank, it's going to use a cumulative. So basically look at the stored grades. So if I come back here and I leave this blank, that's the same as if I set it to cumulative. Same thing, it gives you more. If there's a no store codes in the term, it's going to use all the ones. Same with the grade. If you have no grade level in there, it's going to use the historical range from the school. So if your school is a 9 to 12 and the historical grade setup is 9 to 12, it's going to use grades 9th to 12th grade. Same thing the year. If there's nothing in there, it's going to look at all school years. Credit type is going to look at all credit types. So those are very valuable sections to limit down the grades. And just to show you a little bit more about what we're looking at here. So district courses, I'm just going to show something here about how finite, where you can define some of this stuff. So this is US history. If I come down here, so I can set it here where, hey, this class doesn't count in GPA. This class doesn't count in class rank. This class doesn't count in honor roll. I can do a combination of any of these. But if you set it here on the course, when you store the grades for this course, they're going to automatically have those checked or unchecked. Or if I'm doing a current, if this is set to exclude in GPA and look at current grades, it's not going to use this course in the GPA as well. One other thing here, we discussed added value when setting up the grade scale in part 1. And I said I'd go a little bit more in depth of how added value works. So we're at that part. So for the course, you can choose to say, hey, let's pretend this is AP history. We have GPA added value. So it still uses a default grade scale where an A is a 4, but you know what? If you get an A in this class, we're going to give you one more point. So we want it to be like a 5. And again, we're going to do some crossover here. So if that course is set to allow added value of a 1, let me come in and look at my default grade scale. When I store grades or, filtering through current, if I check, let's, for example, these grades, I got an A, I got an A minus, I got a B plus. The added value will be used and stored with those grades. Oh, you got a B minus, you don't get any added value. You will just get the 2.667. Now, the other part of that, and where some of the confusion comes in, with the added value, when I store this grade of an A, it does not store with a 5. It still stores with a 4, but the added value field will have a 1 in it. I know we get some calls about that, or there's some confusion in that. Let me just show you. Let's pick a random student. Hope they have stored grades. Okay. Just using this as an example. So GPA points and added value are two different fields. So let's say, for example, he has an A, this. In the weighted and the simple GPAs we looked at, the GPA points is going to be a 4 for both of them because we've not added in the added value. And this is how it's going to store. It's going to store as a 4 and a 1. Let me just go back and show you. Is added value not in here? Of course it's not. Let me find that really quick. Added value can be used in your calculation. And that's how you'll get the 5 on that. Do apologize. So we do have plenty of KBs about how it works for simple GPA, weighted GPA, GPA with added values and everything like that. So this is an example. So this is the exact same formula as we looked at earlier, except it uses the added value. So in our example grade we're looking at, the weighted GPA we looked at before, the GPA points would be a 4. In this example, it's taking that 4 and that 1, that added value, and creating the 5. So instead of doing the math of the potential credit times the 4, it's going to do it times the 5. So I just want to make the distinction here of when you do the added value, it's not storing as the 5, it's storing at the 4, and additional value is the 1, and then you do the math such as this to get the 5 when you do the calculation. And then the other one, the projected, we don't see many projected, but people do use it. Projected in here is both stored and current. So we can take a look at what's stored. We're looking at our Y1 grades, and then we're adding in what your current final grades are. So if we stored your grades today, what's your GPA going to look like once all these grades are finalized? We do have KPs and information on it. It's not something we see a whole lot, but you do have that ability to be like, okay, you have these 3 years stored and you're currently in your senior year. We can kind of see that running tally of what your GPA is going to be up until we store. And that's what projected are. These options down here aren't used unless you're actually doing projected. You can look at the current final grades. So if we're in Q1 and our current grade display, you can add those grades into your stored grades. You can actually also look at stored grades for this term. So if you use your Y1 as your only thing you look at up here, but you've only stored S1 grades, but you still want to see how it's looking so far, you could do this. So it's looking at Y1 for all your other grades, but your S1 is being taken to account for this year to see what your GPA is looking like. You also have, if you do this, so if there's a Y1 grade for that course, it doesn't use the S1. If there's no Y1 grade, it would use the S1 when looking at the stored grades. And then is it using the credit hours from the stored grade or from the course? I know that's a quick overview. It's not something we see, but it does give you the ability to add your current grades or your stored grades, as I say, as you keep rolling to that. So you can see how they progress throughout the year before it's quote unquote official. Now there are a bunch of there's the GPA debt code, and it can be used in a couple different places. Another thing you need to know about debt codes. Debt codes can only add to the GPA. It does not change the GPA. For example, this one, you do the GPA method, the name. So we're looking at the simple. It's the same one we have. We're making sure it's cumulative and the term is S2. So if I go back to this GPA calculation, this is calculation type is already set to projected and term is set to S1. So those debt codes don't change what's in here. They only add to what's in here. So if I left this blank like this, and we looked at this debt code, okay, now we're looking at stored S2 grades. Again, you can add in there, you can't change. So some people do like to either leave this completely open and let your debt code put in the information, or some people like to be very precise within here. You could do the same thing by setting cumulative S2. And in this debt code, if you would just do GPA method equals simple, it has the same factors right there. We do have a GPA debt KB that explains a lot of this stuff. But again, the biggest thing is this adds to what is on the GPA calculation page. It does not change. That's another pain point, common issue. People call in, be like, well, here's one, for example. You have your, on your report card, you have quarter 1 GPA, quarter 2 GPA, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And you're like, well, they're all the same, and we haven't even had quarter 3 yet. Well, it's because most likely your debt code or the GPA you're pulling is set to current, and your current grade displays quarter 2. So it's using your quarter 2 grades for all of those spots. So that's a couple things we run into is GPA debt adds to the GPA. It does not change. Now, where do you use this? One major place you use it is in your GPA student screens setup. This is under school GPA student screens. And once it's set here, it shows in your cumulative info. Let me bring back up the test server and kind of show you the path here. So we're back at Apple Grove High School. School. Under grading, we have GPA student screens. First, this is the drop down that where you choose what GPA shows under quick lookup. So again, we're showing simple. And you have up to 12 rows. So you can do information. This one, we're doing credit hours, class rank, and the 2 different GPAs. Now, when you're looking at the student, this is going to be under their cumulative info page. So if I go back to Scott here and I go to cumulative info, we're going to see the same 4 lines here. So the weighted GPA set. So you can use the cumulative info to kind of do a snapshot and show all the different ways and all the different versions of the GPA and information you want here. And same thing where our quick lookup will show there. We've made a lot of changes, so stuff's going to be all over the place. But that's one place where you use the debt codes. Another one a lot of people use, this is just a sample of a report card. We're setting up, it'll be the same thing. And method equals simple. So in this case, like I said, they're using the simple method, and then they're showing quarter one on this line, quarter two on this line at S1. I'm going to assume it's all set to stored grades and the terms are left blank. So we're looking at your simple, your stored grades for quarter one, what your GPA is for then, stored grades for quarter two, what your GPA is for there, and your final S1. So those are the two main places where you're going to use those DAC codes, and that's how they pull. Next thing we have on here, we already talked about current grade display and the quick lookup, how you change what GPA shows there and what the current grade display is. So, depending on your setup, what can change the GPA? Well, if you store more grades, if you change what your current grade is, if the student's grades change in the grade book, the quick lookup preferences, I'll go over that here in a second. Obviously, your current grade display, if you change from quarter one to quarter two, depending on your GPA set, it could change. All this stuff. The courses, what's set to include in GPA, what's not set to include in GPA, your grade scales, all of those different things can change or impact the GPA you're looking at. So, hey, the GPA is correct when I look at the cumulative info screen, but it's not correct when I look at the transcript I print out. Well, the DAC code is probably changing information here. And so, like I said, GPAs are not wrong. They're just doing something different than what you think. So it could be, again, it's pulling grades you don't think they're pulling, or it's pulling grades you think, not pulling grades you think it's pulling. It could be that the students' the grades themselves have different information. I had one where somebody had manually entered in grades. Instead of putting in a 4, they put in a 44. And, the student somehow has a 10 GPA, something like that could happen. Again, the grade scale setup, what's counted in the GPA, what counts as credit, what the GPA points, all the information we went over in the last session can highly affect the GPA. The grade scale that's on the course, if there's added value like we went over there, sections can have a different grade scale than the course. So your health might be on the default, but you might have one section that's under a 100-point scale. Somebody accidentally set it up or imported in the incorrect information. What I do when I troubleshoot is I always look at the GPA. I take a look at the grades it's supposed to be pulling, and I get it in Excel, and I basically do the math just like we were showing earlier with the different columns. Because again, every time it's either doing the math differently than somebody wants, or it's like, oh, hey, we don't mean for these 2 P's that they got in 6th grade to be a part of this GPA. We forgot to exclude them. Something's either adding or something's not adding into the GPA that they think it is. I do see we have a couple Q&As in there.
Yeah, Charles. John asked this one earlier. Are you able to answer a question maybe on standards grading?
Yeah, we can answer it to how it is. Is this session working to leverage standards grading within?
Yeah, I just was wanting to wait and see if maybe John wanted to, if he had a specific question about standards.
We did go over standards grading in part 1 in the math that goes in the background of that. I believe, because I actually just gave this to an agent last week, I believe it's about 27 minutes in to the part 1 is where we go over the standards and the math that's going on in the background. I don't know if here we can kind of see. Give me a second, John. If you're able to unmute yourself, John, maybe we can see the question or what you're looking for here, because some of that was covered in part 1.
Hey there, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. So it was just generally looking at an overall topical review of just standards-based grading and the process of just better grading practice as a whole.
Yeah, that's
And
what.
to see how this session was going to do that.
In part one, and like I said, it is about 27 minutes in the part one. We went over the standards and how the math going on in the background. There's an example of, I believe, a standard grade being worth a 0 and how it can bring something down. So we do cover some of the scenarios in part one. And again, it is about 27 minutes in because I just referred an internal agent to that just the other day. So that's why I have that time code in my head. And hopefully that will, I don't know if you came in right at the beginning. I did send out that link. I can send it out again. Do you have it or do you need it, John?
I have it.
Okay, yeah. It's 27:30 or 27 minutes. It's right there. We did an overview of how the math and what happens in the background of the standards, and hopefully that gets you the information you need.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right. Yes, and Sherry, yeah. I know especially in Alabama, because of coming over from iNow, added value, they do a lot of multiplying with added value. You can use it to add, you can use it to multiply. So we do see that. Makes the math, doing the math and trying to help out a little bit more fun. But yeah, added value can be used to add. There is, you can multiply it as well. We do see that. Linda, the Power Tools GPA validation. Okay, Power Tools GPA, the Power Tools itself is a fantastic troubleshooting tool. It in and of itself is not necessarily supported by us. It is an extra plugin. And I will say the GPA validation, it's not an end all be all. There are some holes in it. For example, if you look at the validation and the GPA has a grade scale on it, the validation does not do the math or the translating of it's a 5 here, but the math does a 4. It just shows you the raw data. So depending on what your GPA is doing, you can't trust it. It is a good tool. It's a good, I do use it visually. If sometimes I just need to look at all the grades and kind of see what the system is doing versus what I think it's doing. But I don't, it's a troubleshooting tool and not an end all be all. Anna, I don't know if you want to add on to that or if anybody else wants to. But I know that the biggest hole I see is it doesn't do that grade scale translation like we talked about earlier. It just says, hey, it's using this grade scale and it shows you the information on the grades, but it doesn't actually show you the math on the back end. So again, it's a good tool, but
yeah,
it's not gospel. It's not gospel all the times. That would be my line. Jason, I don't know if you want to add to it.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the more helpful things it does is show you which grades are being included or excluded, which might help you figure out if you have some bad filters or incorrect assumptions about the filters you put in place.
Yeah, that part's really good because it shows you the grades it's using. It may get you the 5-yard line. It may not get you all the way there. But it does have its perks, but I don't live and die by the validation.
We can, Charles, we can also mention that it might not work with current simple. Most likely just work with a cumulative whenever you are working with historical grades. But I have seen situations with the current, it doesn't quite display the way that we expect.
Correct. And Margaret, yes, I will. Again, that was I was pointing to our part 1 that we did last month, but I will drop it into the chat for anybody who came in later, because we did talk about We did talk about the grade scales on different types of grading in part 1. Obviously, that greatly affects GPAs. So, Margaret, if you look at that, and again, specifically the standards and how the standard grade scales and the math in the background can affect the standard grade is, again, I believe it's 27 or 2730. It's right around in there. Let's see here. And Linda, to your last one about it looking at by the course versus what's on the grade scale. Margaret, not a problem whatsoever. I know we've both been busy on that one. To Linda, going back to there, we kind of would need to see the setup here, because as far as I know, it should be pulling from depending on the setup, it's going to pull from the grades themselves, and depending on some setup, it's going to pull from the information that's on the section chorus. So I can't fully answer that without us actually seeing what's been done, and what your setup is. Okay, just Tracy, I'm looking at here.
Tracy's basically asking about the weighted GPA you showed earlier.
Yes. Yeah, that's I can bring that back up here. That's basically going to be the weighted here. Again, this is what ships with Power School. Too many things open. Give me a second. This is what it's going to look like, and it's probably already in your system. So if the potential credit is a 0.5 and an age usually a 4, it would translate it down to a 2 in this case. So it's already kind of built in there if that's exactly what you're looking for. The other thing, simple percent and weighted percent also come out of the box as far as I know. It does the exact same thing. It just, instead of looking at this field, it looks as this field. So everything else is the same. It's just instead of looking at this, it's going to look at that. So you can look at the GPA percent. It just changes the field it looks at. So that's why we didn't really go over it, because everything's exactly the same except for, do you look at GPA points box versus the GPA percent box? But I would say, Tracy, this is already kind of built in here. And so have your guidance director take a look at the weighted and the information here, because this to me perfectly does exactly what they're looking for. Okay.
Amy, are you seeing that error message when you use a data access tag?
Yeah, we usually see that it's either you're looking for a GPA that's not there, or there's something where we've seen that. I think, Anna, if I'm right, there might be a space in the name or something. There's something weird like that, I believe we've seen. Does that
I was going to say the same thing, Charles. There's either a space in there or it's not exactly the same. There might be a spelling mistake. It's not identical to what the calculation method is called.
Yeah. And I think most of the times we see it's because the GPA calculation has a space after it, or the deck code, somebody spelled simply wrong or something. It's usually one of those two things. If it's not one of those, let us know. We can take a look at it. But that's the most common thing is,
and sometimes coming to the screen and literally copying the method name. It's in here, guarantees you can then paste it into the
just because we did go over it, and I did say the fact that we do have the det tags. Let me give here. I'm going to drop this into the chat as well. This is our GPA DAT KB that kind of goes even more in depth than what we did. So for Amy, you would either want to look at the student screens, the school's GPA student screens like we looked at, or look at the district GPA calculation methods, and look at the name that's on that page up here at the top, the method name. 9 times out of 10, I can't choose that. It's going to be, there's a space after the name or before the name, something like that, and that's going to cause that error. But if you can't crack it, let us know. Yeah, Linda, that is good. When we use weighted, again, I use the what's out of the box, simple versus weighted. You guys can call the GPAs whatever it is. Weighted to you could be what simple is in the system. What it's called and what it does is completely up to you. And that's why we set the baseline at the beginning of what weighted versus simple is to Power School the system. But whatever you want to call it, whatever your math you want to do, completely up to you. We are here with a minute left at the top of the hour. If there's any last minute questions, or if anybody on my side has anything else they want to add, speak now or forever hold your peace.